Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by the Pelvic Health Professionals membership. Connected Yoga Teachers, as I'm recording this episode for you, we have just wrapped up the very first 20-hour online Yoga for Pelvic Health training. And I am so excited to see what this group of yoga teachers is taking out into their one-on-one sessions, into their classes, and also that they automatically get enrolled in our Pelvic Health Professionals membership. And let me tell you why. Back in 2017, I created an online Yoga for Pelvic Health course, and it was because I had this feeling like every yoga teacher could benefit from this information that I was learning about pelvic health. And so I put this course together. And when we went through that course, everyone in that course had such amazing questions following up. And so I went back and met with different pelvic health professionals on my own, paid for their time, did one-on-one interviews with them, jotted down a bunch of notes, and brought it back to those teachers who asked those amazing questions. And eventually I got to the point where I thought, this is a thing. Like, yoga teachers would love to be in on these conversations, would love to be able to submit their questions and learn more about how the body works and how we as yoga teachers are part of this pelvic health professional team. Today's guest, Carolyn Vandyken, is actually one of our guest experts who has come to talk with us inside of the membership, is coming back for a Q&A session. I'm so excited about that. That's actually happening this month. Carolyn Vandyken is also really passionate about breaking down the silos and making this information available to movement educators and our doctors and our PTs and all of the people, all of the individuals that work with the human body. So if you're up for more conversations like this one that we're going to have today, where we talk about the biopsychosocial model and how that relates to teaching yoga, if you're up for more conversations like this and you want to be part of that learning, come on over and check out pelvichealthprofessionals.com. You get to decide on there if you'd like to sign up for a monthly membership or an annual membership. And each and every month we choose new topics with new guest experts, and we really dive in based on the questions that our members have. If you have any questions at all about pelvic health professionals, make sure you get in touch with our team. We would love to hear from you, either in the comments or send us an email. It's info@pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And again, if you want to join us, it's pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Before I get right into things, let me make sure that I introduce myself for anyone who's new here. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I'm a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you because, wow, do I ever know what it's like to leave a yoga teacher training and feel like you're just kind of out in the jungles, out by yourself. And this past year, I think that there are times when we all as yoga teachers have faced brand new challenges and maybe feel like we're isolated in our communities as a yoga teacher and also an entrepreneur. And so our main goal each and every week is to bring you a podcast episode that will help to support you in some way. This week, we're digging into a topic, and you might even be wondering, what is this? It's a bit of a mouthful to say, but it is such a great way to look at how we can help our students. The biopsychosocial model of care, or the biopsychosocial model. And if you're wondering what this is, it's really a whole person approach to health and wellness. In today's episode, Carolyn is going to talk to us about how this relates to pain and also how the body functions and moves. Over and over again, we as yoga teachers hear students come to us and tell us that they have a specific pain that they're dealing with in their body. And we know from different research that really using the tools of yoga, especially when it helps to down-regulate the nervous system, this can really help us to recover when we are dealing with persistent pain, or even if we are figuring out how to be mobile again after an injury has healed. I want to highlight here how important I think it is for us as yoga teachers to take that initial moment where someone comes to us, maybe on Zoom or in person, or sends us an email and tells us that they have an injury, or they have a pain, or they have something going on in their body. And I know that right away we want to start helping them with the amazing tools that we have in our back pocket as yoga teachers. But just a reminder that when those students come to us, we are really taking care of the whole person when we can match them with a physiotherapist or a physical therapist or someone out in the healthcare field who really specializes in this. And Carolyn's going to talk to us about how we can try and find that amazing person in our community and how to look for them. I think this is super important, that we don't want to just tell people, go meet with any PT in your area. We want to find someone who specializes and works with this biopsychosocial model of care as well. But I want to share a story from my own days as a newer yoga teacher. I feel like I didn't know this piece of things. I feel like I was trying to have all of the answers for students. I was trying to address the issue that they were coming to me with. And I think I did a disservice to some people when a referral was needed first. Go see your pelvic health PT or go see your PT. Finding someone who really specializes in something to make sure that they're not missing a piece of this really important healthcare provider puzzle. I've learned from that. I'm really passionate about that. And I also know the flip side of things, that sometimes our yoga students will come to us and they will say, I can't afford to go and see this specialist, or I don't have time to go. And so sometimes these people are joining your group classes, and we do what we can while also knowing where our limit is. Carolyn and I talk about that in today's episode, so I won't get into that too far. I also want to let you know that previously on the podcast, we have dug into this topic around pain, and we'll make sure to link to those episodes for you. So episode 116 and 117, Pain Language with Shelley Prosco, and then some more specific pain episodes. Episode 17, we talked about yoga for chronic pain with Julia Kafazov. Episode 12, Joanne Pinault came and talked to us about sciatic pain. In episode 75, Dr. Sinead DeFord talked to us about yoga for pelvic girdle pain. In episode 133, Casey Dannenhauer talked to us about yoga for painful sex. And in episode 77, Helena Spears talked to us about painful bladder syndrome, also known as interstitial cystitis. The reason why we've covered pain so often on the podcast is because this is one of the leading reasons people will turn to yoga, is they have a pain or discomfort in the body, and they're coming to yoga to try and relieve that. This is why I'm so excited that we have Carolyn Vandyken, an expert in the biopsychosocial model, coming to talk with us today. So like I said, she was a guest expert in our Pelvic Health Professionals membership a while back, and you can join the membership right now and go and have a listen. It's more in depth. But right after we did that special guest expert call inside of the membership, I knew I wanted to bring Carolyn on the podcast so that you could hear some of this. You could hear Carolyn explaining why we need to understand the science of pain when we are yoga teachers and how we can use this understanding to really help our students. We dig into some of the science of pain, how we can help our students who are coming to us with those pain issues, and the really important language that we're using around pain and the messages that we are sending out there with that language. And again, go back and listen to the episodes 116 and 117 with Shelley Prosco if you want to get even further into pain language. One other note here, connected yoga teachers, I really think that it's so helpful when we can take a piece of learning like today's podcast episode with Carolyn Vandyken and then be able to ask more questions. The exciting thing is that if you are listening to this live, you actually can come and ask Carolyn more questions inside of the Pelvic Health Professionals membership. So she is our guest expert coming in for our open Q&A call on February the 22nd. Also, on top of this, in March, we are doing a full workshop on yoga for pelvic girdle pain. So those students that come to you and tell you, I have tight hips, I have pain in my pelvis, a lot of the time our prenatal and postnatal students will tell us this, or just anyone with a pelvis at some point in their life may experience pelvic girdle pain. This is honestly the one thing that I get asked about the most often from yoga students and also from yoga teachers. And so I'm excited. I've put this workshop together and you will have tools to take away, different poses, different information, different breath practices to really help those students who are dealing with pelvic girdle pain. And the amazing piece of this is that all of that is inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. Now, let me tell you a little insider secret here. The membership price is going up in March. And so what I would suggest is get in there, join in February, do the Q&A call with Carolyn Vandyken, ask as many questions as you would like in there. There's a question form to submit all your questions with. And what's included is that training for all members of Pelvic Health Professionals. So to get the most bang for your buck there, I would join the membership and grab all of those things, and then also have a look around at any other resources in there that really help you right now as a yoga teacher. The reason why I'm so excited about this is because I think learning is not this one-way street. Yes, you'll have a listen to today's podcast episode, and I know you're going to learn so much in this short time from Carolyn because she's an amazing teacher. But then I love that you also have the opportunity to ask more questions beyond that and really dig into how this can help the individual people that you're working with. Alrighty, as you can tell, connected yoga teachers, I get really excited about the learning potential and just the way we can collaborate and go further with this after the podcast is over. I want to give 2 shout outs today. One to Angela Del Franco, who left a review for Pelvic Health Professionals. Angela says, I'm very grateful that I found both the Pelvic Health Professionals and the Connected Yoga Teacher. I've taught yoga for 15 years, and now more than ever, I feel inspired and educated in the conversation of yoga. You present the beauty and challenges we all face as teachers. I love that you link articles, podcasts, guest information, and notes. You are very thorough. I've made a list of all of the podcasts on pelvic floor health, and I crave more time in my schedule to listen to them all. I feel like a kid in a candy store. I also just signed up with Lackner & McLennan Insurance after listening to the podcast with Beth McVie. Thank you so much, Angela, for taking the time to leave a review and for taking the time to really share how both the podcast and Pelvic Health Professionals is supporting you as a yoga teacher. In case anyone else wants to see a full list of all of the episodes that we've done about pelvic health related topics, you can head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com and see a full list of articles and podcasts. Those are the ones that anyone has access to. You do not have to be a member of Pelvic Health Professionals to check those out. Also, anything I chat about and anything Carolyn chats about today is in our show notes. I really enjoy thorough podcast show notes. I love that Crunch does that work for us. She takes thorough notes with timestamps so you can go back and find whatever it is that you're looking for if you're on the go as you listen to this. Next week, we are going to be celebrating our 4-year podcast anniversary. I cannot believe this, Connected Yoga Teachers. Thank you for being here along this ride. It is wild that it has been 4 years, and to celebrate, different listeners have asked me to share more about what's going on behind the scenes with the podcast. So I have a list of questions. If you have questions, make sure you submit them to me. There's a button on our homepage where you can actually submit a voicemail. I love to hear from you. And also, if you want to give us a gift, leaving a review for the podcast is one of the best gifts you can give us. I also want to give a huge shout out of thank you to the team over at Schedulicity for being our sponsor. And that means that they enable this podcast to make it to your ears. They are supporting behind the scenes, not only when yoga teachers need a scheduling software, but also by helping to pay our team to make this podcast possible for you to listen to for free. So that's another thank you that you could give. You could tell Schedulicity that you love the podcast, tag them in a social media post, tell them that you listen to their hot tip of the week, and tell them how much the podcast means to you. Let's hear the hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga teachers. This is Allie from Schedulicity with the hot tip of the week. We've talked a lot about how Schedulicity can help your class-based business, but we know many teachers also offer one-on-one services like Thai massage. Through your Schedulicity account, you can seamlessly book and manage those services alongside your group classes and workshops. Those calendars are integrated together so you'll never be double booked. If you create a new class that conflicts with another appointment on your schedule, a window will pop up to warn you of the exact dates and times that interfere. We've got your back so you can take care of your clients' backs.
Okay, Connected Yoga teachers, let's dive in and meet Carolyn Vandyken, who is one of the co-founders of Reframe Rehab. Definitely check out this website. Carolyn has practiced in orthopaedics and pelvic health for the past 33 years. She's a McKenzie credentialed physiotherapist, certified in acupuncture, and has a certificate in cognitive behavioral therapy. Carolyn has been heavily involved in postgraduate pelvic health education and research in lumbopelvic pain. She speaks at numerous international conferences and has written extensively on the topics of pelvic health, orthopedics, and pain science for the past 12 years. Carolyn's mission in her practice is to break down the silos in clinical practice between musculoskeletal pain, pelvic pain, pain neuroscience education, and psychology by providing learning opportunities from the world's leading clinical educators on these topics. Let's meet Carolyn and learn more about the biopsychosocial model and how this applies to a yoga class. Carolyn, welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Shannon, thanks so much again for inviting me. It's exciting to have a conversation with you always, so I'm looking forward to it.
I was really excited when you came and talked to our pelvic health professionals group, and I knew then that I wanted you to come over and talk to our Connected Yoga teachers all about the biopsychosocial framework or model. Do you want to first define what that is?
Biopsychosocial framework is really taking a whole person approach. I mean, as a physiotherapist, I talk about pain, but even function, really, considering the whole person, which I think as yoga instructors, that's already kind of built into your framework as well. So I think for yoga instructors, this is a more natural progression than for a lot of physiotherapists at this point who are trained more in a biomechanical or biomedical model. So it just means that you're considering the tissue health of the person in front of you, their psychological sort of stress components, distress components, kind of mental health components, and then also the social context within which they live and how that may be affecting the experience that they are currently having, whether that's a lived experience of pain or any other sort of issue that they may be presenting with. It's not always pain. Sometimes it's muscle spasm, or sometimes it's, things that they wouldn't necessarily connect to pain. But it's really about taking that whole person approach and considering pain. Again, I'm going to talk about pain here for a moment. Pain is an output of the brain. So if it's an output of the brain, we have to consider all the potential inputs if we're going to help our clients change that experience.
That's amazing. I love how we're looking at, yoga teachers are always great at looking at body and mind going together, those things. But we don't always think about the social part of things. And maybe even this year is a year where we're thinking about it a little bit more when we have less social time with people.
Right. The social isolation of COVID, I think, for a lot of people has been a real challenge. And certainly the stress added with sort of the pandemic as well. And so considering all of those aspects is really important when we're thinking about a pain experience, for example.
Right. And so how did you get into this work? Like, tell us about the work that you do, and how did you get here to helping people with both pelvic health and pain and the biopsychosocial model?
So I graduated in 1987, so just a couple years ago. I've been practicing in physio for 33 years. Most of my practice has been in orthopedics, and so very much musculoskeletal type of problems. And I really started, I think one of my biases for sure is self-efficacy. I really am a strong believer in helping and empowering people to help themselves. And my initial training really in musculoskeletal health was in the McKenzie system for low back pain and neck pain. So again, a very self-directed, kind of patient-directed approach. And I think that set me up well from the beginning of my career to really be open to this concept that really our bodies heal themselves, right? And I think as clinicians or as yoga therapists, we're facilitators of that process, but really it's the person in pain. It's their job to change something about their experience in order to heal or to move through the experience that they're having. So I think, first of all, my experience as a McKenzie credentialed therapist has really set me up for that. And then it's about 20 years ago that I had my own issues with pelvic health. And so my firstborn, who's now 31, was a big baby. He was born in Northern Ontario in a small northern hospital, and he was a high forceps delivery and left me with some significant pelvic floor issues that I certainly recognized as a physiotherapist without specific pelvic health training. But it wasn't until he was 10 and I had 3 children that I really started to recognize that my incontinence was really impacting my life. And so I got to the point where, I couldn't play basketball anymore because, 2 or 3 trips up and down the floor, and I'd have to go change my pad because I had significant stress incontinence. And I was 35 years old, right? And so it was then sort of 2001, 2002 that I took my first pelvic health course. And a little funny story there. At that point, I think they were just trying to draw physios into this practice. And so what we do as physios is when we train, we practice on each other. And so I got to that course just not even cluing in that what we were going to be doing all weekend was doing internal exams on each other. And when I went back and looked at the brochure, sure enough, in the small corner in the very bottom right-hand side, there was a little thing that said, we will be doing internal exams on each other. And I was like, oh, I'm a physio. Hold on a second. I've never looked at another woman's vulva. It's not how physios are trained, right? And so anyways, I got past that and got through that first sort of course. And by the last day of that first course, I was comfortable enough to volunteer to be the model for the electrical stim lab. And that just meant I climbed up on the table and 8 physios gathered round, and the instructor inserted a probe into my vagina and put a current into my muscles and had them contract involuntarily. And when that happened, I went, oh, that's my pelvic floor. And everything I had been doing, so I had been trying to do Kegels for the past 10 years, because as a physio, I taught them theoretically, and I knew that that was important for continence. But I had no clue after having my children where my pelvic floor muscles were. I thought I did. I thought I was doing a proper Kegel, but yeah, I wasn't. So that really sort of changed my career. And in 2002, I really started looking more into pelvic health and becoming more and more trained in pelvic health. And so that's really defined my practice over the last 20 years. And then it wasn't until 2008 when I took a course with a really fabulous physiotherapist by the name of Debbie Patterson, who's now in Calgary. And it was called Women in Pain. And it was all about kind of the new research that had been coming out for the last 5 or 8 years at that point on pain neuroscience and the pain system and how it worked. And how everything that we've been taught that, sort of pain was a tissue experience, we now understand that pain is a brain thing. Like pain is a brain thing. The brain produces pain to protect us. That's its job. And it's just one way of protecting us. Muscle spasm is another way. And, the brain can also protect us by, decreasing the available movement at a joint. So creating a lot of stiffness around a joint. We think of stiffness as being a tissue problem. We just need to stretch the tissues out and then we'll be fine. But how many of, as a yoga teacher, how many times do you hear from a client, I stretch my hamstrings all the time. I'm doing all these forward folds and I never gain more flexibility in my hamstrings, right? And that's because muscle tension is also an output of the brain.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating to think of that. Of course. And that really ties in when our yoga teachers work on the more restorative forms of yoga and to kind of get into the nervous system and the brain.
Right.
I also want to highlight that you were a big part of Pelvic Health Solutions at one point. And I have in my notes here, in 2009, there were only 5 pelvic health PTs in all of Ontario, Canada, so our province here. Right. And that thanks to your work and many of the people training of Pelvic Health Solutions, there's now there's thousands of pelvic health PTs that have gone through that. And so I also want to highlight that. When you said that pain is in the brain, how do we communicate that without coming across as it's all in your head?
Right. That's such a great question, Shannon, because I think that's one of our fears when we start talking about pain and pain science in the brain, is that is going to be the perception of the person in pain. Well, you're just telling me it's in my head, right? Which unfortunately is the message that sometimes they've been given by the medical system, because tests have been done, MRIs have been done, and the physician or whomever is doing the test can't find the source of pain that actually correlates with their symptoms. So first of all, let's acknowledge that it is not an uncommon experience for patients to get that message. Maybe it's inadvertent. Maybe it was intentional because the physician or whoever is actually treating the problem is frustrated as well, that yes, you have pain, but we can't find it. We can't find the pain, right? And we look for pain in the tissues, and that's called the biomedical model, where we look for tissue problems that help to explain the pain experience. But that doesn't often work in persistent pain. It works more effectively in acute pain, but in persistent pain, once the tissues have healed, and let's just be really clear, when we have an injury, the tissues heal in about 12 weeks.
Right. That's amazing. I remember you saying this number. And so anything past that 12 weeks, we're starting to look deeper than just the tissues. Is that right?
Right. So once the tissues heal, and we have an ongoing pain problem, first of all, everybody's pain is real. If you have pain at this moment, I want you to hear me say that your pain is real. Your pain is exactly what you say it is. No one should ever question your pain experience. Pain is always personal, right? And so, but what has happened, what we've understood over the last 20 years, and this is a difficult shift for the medical community to make, although there is really strong evidence that this is how pain is produced, is that the brain produces pain to get your attention. And so let's take a little example of that. One of the best ways to explain that is a cut finger, right? If we go home tonight, Shannon, we cut up our vegetables for dinner and we cut our finger, we immediately get pain. We look down, we see the blood, we stop what we're doing, we go and rinse the cut, we assess for the depth of the cut. Do we need stitches? Thankfully, we don't, because who has 4 hours to spend in emergency tonight? The emergency room. And so I bandage my cut up and it's throbbing, right? Okay. However, maybe by bedtime tonight, the throbbing has stopped. And I look at the bandage and I go, oh yeah, I forgot I cut my finger 6 hours ago. And I'm curious, because I'm kind of like that. Let's see what the cut looks like. Did I make the right decision? And if I very carefully peel the bandage off, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours after the cut, my original injury, it doesn't hurt anymore. Now, the tissues are still cut. That hasn't changed. but the pain is no longer there. Now, why? We ask ourselves, why does that happen? We don't think about it, but that's because the brain knows you've done all the right things to take care of that cut. You cleaned the cut. You ensure that you didn't need stitches. You put a bandage on to stop the bleeding and to stop infection from getting into the cut. And then the body is going to go and do its job to heal that cut. And you no longer need to be warned of the potential danger of that cut or the actual danger of that cut, right? So if we look at the definition of pain, pain is, this is the international definition, an unpleasant, that seems to make sense. It's an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience. So it doesn't say sensory or emotional experience. It's sensory and emotional. So it's always sensory. We feel it in our tissues, and it's involved with our emotional response, or sometimes just our emotions alone can cause pain. We all need to remember as kids that when we wake up in the morning and we have a sore tummy, it may be related to the fact that I have a test that day at school, or there's a bully in my class and that bully is really picking on me. And so a child might wake up with a tummy ache, and a really intuitive mom or dad might say, what's really going on here? Tell me a little bit about what's happening today, right? And once they start to talk about it and start to realize that there's a connection between the tummy ache and stress, right? That we also understand that pain is emotional, and the physicality of that stomach ache is 100% real, but there's nothing wrong with the stomach per se.
Right.
So we've known that from sort of childhood on, but somehow when we grow up, we forget that pain is sensory and emotional, right? So we can have a lot of stress in our lives. We can have different things that are going on that can sensitize our nervous system, make it easier for our nervous system to fire in a protective way, and we can get a pain response.
Okay. So for sorry, you were going to say something.
So it doesn't make that pain not real.
Right.
It just means that we can't just look at tissue health when we consider pain. We have to look much broader at everything that's going on in that person's life. I'll just finish that definition of pain for just a sec and then go ahead and ask your next question. But so pain is a sensory and an emotional experience that protects us from actual harm, like when I cut my finger or I sprain my ankle, right? My brain gets my attention to get me to do something appropriate to that, maybe get an x-ray to make sure my ankle's not broken or all the pieces. And then within, a couple of days or maybe a week or two, my ankle starts to feel better and I start to challenge the tissues again and walk a little bit more on it. And then it heals and I start to decrease the sensitivity of my brain's alarm system by challenging it and using it again. But 1 in 4 people, after they have an acute injury, even though the tissues have healed, go on to have persistent pain.
Right.
Right? And the other thing that we need to recognize is pain is also produced, here's the other part of the definition, with the potential of injury. So if we all take our index finger and pull it back as far as you can, there it hurts, okay? And if you're watching this, I've just pulled my index finger back until the edge of pain, I stop. I get pain at that point. That pain is real, but there's no tissue injury. My brain is saying, Carolyn, don't go any further because you're approaching the limit of your tissue tolerance. And if you go further, you will tear some ligaments or structures, okay? So the brain also produces pain when we're getting too close to the edge of tissue tolerance.
Okay, that seems so relevant to our yoga classes. This idea of finding a sensation, a stretch sensation, and sometimes it's tipping over into like, are we pushing it too far? And it's really a balance of when you're a yoga teacher, you cannot be in those people's bodies.
Right.
We're guiding them with our cues. This was my question as yoga teachers. And we have so many different listeners who have like a varying degree of training in pain. Some of them are yoga therapists who very much specialize in pain. Some of them are brand new 200-hour grads, just like trying to get all of the cues and the poses and all of those things and maybe don't have a lot of training in pain and the new pain science. So I'm wondering if someone comes to us at the end of a class and talks about their pain, which is one of the most common things, are there things that you can think of that would be helpful in that moment for our yoga teachers?
So I think one of the first things, that's a great question, Shannon. I think one of the first things is listen before we talk. So I'll listen to the story, listen to the context of the story that the person in pain is sharing with you at that point. Try and get a little bit of an understanding into what they believe is going on, because that's really an important component. If they think that their tissues are damaged or injured in some way, then that's going to be a very different sort of discussion around their pain versus someone who feels like they've just, they're getting pain because they're hitting the edge of their tissue tolerance, right? So listening first and really understanding the context of the story, understanding how long ago did this pain start? So is it acute or is it persistent? And you'll hear the word persistent that I use more than chronic, okay? Not in love with the word chronic. Chronic for most people, if I say chronic to you, Shannon, what does it sort of bring up any sort of thoughts around resolution of that problem?
Yeah, it just sounds like it's going to go on forever. I have this chronic cough. That sounds like
Right.
I will be coughing for the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah. Versus persistent, to me, and the community who really looks at pain also would agree with that. Persistent just means it's lasting longer than it should, whereas chronic means it's never going away. And those are subtle language cues, but can be really important. So I try and always use the word persistent, and sometimes I get it wrong because we're so used to using chronic, but mostly I will use the word persistent because it just says to them, hey, it's lasting longer than it should have, given that tissues heal in 8 to 12 weeks. So if the person talking to you at the end of class says, I've had this back problem and it's been going on for 2 years now, just that length of time alone should be your first cue that there may actually be a pain system component to that versus a tissue component to that, okay? And the changes that happen in the nervous system to make the nervous system more sensitive and produce pain more easily, those changes are just as physical and real as the changes in the tissues themselves, like a disc bulge or a disc herniation, let's say if we're talking about back pain, right? And so the first cue is time. How long has it been? Okay.
Right.
Now you can also have someone who has persistent low back pain that has a mechanical component, but then asking a question like, well, is there any pattern to the pain? So, are there any specific movements that consistently make the pain better or worse? And if there's a pattern, like forward bending always makes it worse, and backward bending usually helps, that's actually a recognizable pattern. If someone said that to you, Shannon, what would you recommend for them to adapt in your class, for example?
Yeah, I'd be saying, okay, let's follow that message that's coming in. Right. Let's take out the forward folding for a bit and see if that decreases the sensation. I want to also pull in that the other thing I've learned to do as a yoga teacher, I don't think I did this right out of I know I didn't do this right out of YTT, is I refer people to a PT. Like if they're telling me about a persistent pain issue, I want to make sure that they have, checked in with their doctor, maybe going to see a PT, really depending what it is, and I'm referring them out. And I love how you said to get more of the story. Like sitting there and listening has been a huge gift to me. I really learned so much from the people who are telling me about their pain.
Right. And so I think that again, referral to a PT. Shannon, do you make a specific referral or do you just say go back to your doctor and ask for a PT referral? How do you manage that?
I know the PTs in our area and their different specialties now. Yeah. Over the years, I've gotten to know that. Right. So I'll do that. I mean, I had someone coming to, when I used to do Thai yoga massage, showing up and looking really gray in color. And I just said, I can't see you. You need to go to your doctor.
Right.
And he had a heart issue going on. And his wife was like, I think you saved his life. So I think we can't just think, oh, well, what harm could a bit of yoga or Thai yoga massage do? Sometimes we need that push to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And so, again, just looking at the big picture, listening to the story, putting all the clues together. He looked gray. He looked unwell. He needed some immediate medical attention, really, right? Yeah, which is brilliant. I would say that just kind of as you suggested, that all physio referrals are probably not created equal, right? And so if you're starting to liaise with some clinicians in your community, really get to know them. And I encourage physios to really get to know the yoga instructors in your community as well and figure out what it is that they're doing and what their area of specialty is. Because if it's acute pain, that may be a bit of a different story. I just hurt my back on the weekend and gosh, I went to yoga today and it's worse. You probably should go and see your local physio.
Right.
That would be a really great referral. If they've had pain for 2 years, then knowing a little bit more about the physiotherapists in your community and who really takes a whole person kind of biopsychosocial approach is also going to make all the difference.
Yes.
Because just as it's hard for us to make that shift or that change, it's hard for clinicians to move out of the model of treating the mechanics of the spine. When in persistent pain, that's rarely the problem. Sometimes it is, and you need to assess for it, but it's rarely the whole story.
Yeah. This is great. It's the same in the yoga teacher world. If someone would have referred someone to my yoga classes when I was fresh out of, I went through this phase where I was teaching like hot flow yoga. There are certain people who would not benefit from that class with me. And so it's important that our yoga teachers are also referring to other teachers when they specialize in something as well.
Right.
I want to ask you about, because you said listen to their story. And a lot of our listeners know that I recently had a herniated disc. And our good friend, both of us know her, Shelley Prosco, had called me. It was really sweet of her to call me. And the first question she said was, is there anything that you are doing that brings you out of that pain? Like, it was like she was asking me the questions where I was really thinking, okay, I'm going to get lots of answers from Shelley. And it was like the answers were within me.
Right. Yeah. And so that's a powerful tool to really, again, I always say to people, the people who end up in my office as a physiotherapist are usually the patients who are a little bit more distressed about their pain, who have a hard time looking inwards because maybe there's a lot going on in their life or they've been given messages that are quite catastrophic, for example, about their particular pain problem. And so they're kind of feeding into that catastrophic messaging and they're very fearful. I always say kind of catastrophization is a big word that just means we're kind of freaking out a little bit, right?
Right.
And we all freak out. I bet you, Shannon, when you first had that leg dominant sort of disc herniation type of pain, you were freaking out a little bit, right?
Yes, I was.
Yes. So welcome to the human race, right? That is normal. If we get stuck in that freaking out mode, that's a bit of a problem because the freaking out mode will actually sensitize the nervous system even more and more and more so that the pain doesn't necessarily stop, even though the herniation may be healing.
Yes.
Right? And statistically, what do we know about herniations? 80% of people with disc herniations resolve the problem on their own.
Right.
Okay. And so Shelley's question was brilliant because if we really listen to our bodies and find the positions that give us comfort, particularly with that leg pain, right, and minimize the things that bring the leg pain on. And if we can do that consistently, and especially with herniations, we're talking weeks and a few months usually, whereas disc bulges and other sort of mechanical pain, we're usually talking days and maybe a week or two. So bit of a different scenario for you. You're in it for the long haul, just a bit more, right? But it gets better, right? if you're given that message, this will get better, you've already kind of figured out how to unload that hot nerve root.
Yes.
And do lots of activities that unload that hot nerve root and avoid the things that keep loading it, right? So my job is to guide you through that process, right? Whether it's a physical sort of issue of physical pressure on the nerve root, or also to help you guide through that process if it's an emotional issue that is sensitizing the nervous system. So you're really stressed and there's a lot of things going on. And, what is the best way that you have found to work on managing your stress? Well, I don't have anything. Well, okay, now we can start to have a conversation around, well, what things might you do? Here's some suggestions that I might have. What interests you? What sort of speaks to you?
Yeah.
But it's about empowering you to change the chemistry of your nervous system. And pain is an imbalance in that chemistry.
Yeah. Now, in studying with you, I know that you lean heavily on things like yoga and taichi, I think are the two that I heard of,
Right.
where there is can you explain why you guide people towards certain types of yoga and taichi? Like, what about that movement and breath helps people with persistent pain?
Right. So first of all, breathing, right? I think any sort of mind-body practice, the fastest way into the nervous system is through the breath. And we know that with 5 minutes or more sort of cycles of relaxed breathing, we change our physiology. We shift it from a sympathetic response to a parasympathetic response, right? So we help to manage the chemicals that are being sort of dumped and produced in our system in a stress response. And a stress response is very healthy and helpful, but we're only supposed to be there for short periods of time. If we stay in a stress response all the time, then our chemistry changes to that of increased cortisol and adrenaline and chemicals that sensitize our nervous system, right? So one of the reasons I love practices like yoga and meditation, qigong, tai chi, are that they are very focused on the breath. And the breath has a very powerful way of changing our physiology. We also have good evidence just through millennia, actually, that practices like yoga and meditation and qigong and tai chi actually hit the pause button on our thoughts. So they really help to kind of connect mind-body and kind of get us out of that circular thinking that we as human beings can get very trapped into, right? Mm-hmm. Prayer does the same thing. So prayer is another evidence-based way of actually stopping that circuit of thoughts. And Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard has spent his career really studying what he calls evoking the relaxation response, right? And so I think all of these practices that we've been talking about do that. I also use practices that are novel. So the other thing in persistent pain that is really common is once you've had pain for a couple of months, actually it happens very quickly. If you tape 2 fingers together and you do a special kind of MRI called a functional MRI, within 1 minute, the maps on your brain of those 2 separate fingers start to fuse and become one map.
Wow.
Right? Within 1 minute. So our nervous system adapts to the input coming from our tissues very, very quickly, and we call that sensory motor changes or sensory motor smudging, okay? And if you think about it, everything we do is accomplished because of mapping, right? So we had a power outage for 18 hours yesterday.
Oh, you did?
Oh, that was fantastic. And so I had to cancel my class on Sunday night because I had no power, no internet. Anyways, here's a classic example. So we have a backup generator that would at least power the kitchen lights and the refrigerator and some basic stuff. And so I walk downstairs to go to the bedroom, and I go down the stairs and I automatically reach for the light switch to flip it on. Now, my cognitive brain knows that the power's out and that those lights aren't on the generator. But my automaticity kind of brain that really controls everything that I do just goes back to automatic mode, and I flip on the light switch, right? So perfect example. Or if you go to drive a car in the UK, for example, and you're the driver, you're going to go to the passenger side in UK automatically, right? So those are just two examples. Everything we do is mapped in our brain, and we do it automatically once we learn the skill. As soon as we've had an injury, then those maps change. And when we challenge our tissues as they heal, we will remap that injury back to its kind of regular map. We no longer limp, we no longer protect. But many people, sometimes because they don't feel confident in challenging, sometimes for many other reasons, their maps don't go back to the way they should. So they have a pain neurotag, we call it, which is just a group of neurons in the brain that attach to that map to protect that activity, even though the tissues are healed. So we call that sensory motor changes, right? So yoga can be a really great way because especially if it's gentle, some of our gentle yoga practices, so flow, for this type of patient, I'm probably not as excited about, right. But some of our gentle sort of movement practices, provided they're novel for the patient. So if a patient's had so for you, Shannon, if you ended up with some smudging, for example, because of this disc herniation, when you go back to yoga, and I'm sure you have been doing modified yoga in different formats, right? As you challenge the tissues and really kind of listen to that edge of pain, as you go back to yoga, you will redefine your maps again. However, you may find that some maps have become smudged. And for you, it might be more challenging to use yoga to refresh those maps because yoga is so mapped into your brain.
Right.
So for you, maybe doing some Qigong or a more novel kind of sensory motor exercise may be a quicker way into the system so that you can experience movement in that area, the sensation of movement and movement itself that is non-threatening. That's really important. It cannot produce pain when you're doing this remapping work, right? That then will refresh those maps and allow you to go back to functional activity without producing a pain response in that area.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's so interesting to know. And also for our yoga teachers, this is another great reason to not just flow through the same thing over and over again. Those sun salutation, and we'll just continuously do them over and over again. It's great to challenge the brain. I love to throw in, to totally switch the inhale and exhale for people.
Nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And, widen your leg stance. How many different ways can you do tree pose, for example, or do I'm not up on my yoga sort of pose names, so I can't give you them all, but can you do it in a different way? Wide-legged child's pose versus narrow-legged versus, can you add a visual imagery? A lot of yoga instructors are excellent at adding some visualization to the pose. As soon as you get someone to add a visual cue, you've changed the map.
Right.
And the more variability we have in our mapping options, the less likely we are to have pain, because the brain has many options to sort of check before it goes, nope, that's dangerous. Let's produce a pain response. And it happens like that, right? So I'm talking about it like a very planned event, but this is the automatic reptilian part of the brain that just responds like that, right?
Yes. Oh, this is fascinating. I also want to touch on the language and the messages that we hear. So I remember going to, I can't remember if it was the neurologist or the PT. Somebody said it's the first 15 degrees that you're going to bend forward that is like the most dangerous kind of thing when it was really acute. And I went to see my PT, a few weeks later, and she's like, I want you to do this thing where you're going to lean over like a hunchback. And I just thought, I can't do that. And I did it. And I was like, oh, that feels so good. Like I had told my brain, don't be leaning over, like squat down when you go to brush your teeth and all of these things. Right. So do you want to talk about those messages that our yoga students might be hearing?
Yeah, so I think some of the challenges in yoga maybe, and so let's just go back for a moment and talk about your message here for a moment. So as medical professionals, we say a lot of things to patients that really have very little evidence to support them.
Right.
I cannot give you one shred of evidence that says that first 15 degrees is the most dangerous.
Right.
Okay, none. Now, in acute sort of hot, radicular leg pain, again, as Shelley sort of did with you, what are your best postures? What are your worst postures? And let's stay away from your worst postures, because right now they're just irritating that hot nerve root. And let's find ways to kind of calm it down, right? And again, healing in that acute phase is going to be contingent on you doing two things: avoiding the things that really bug you and doing lots of things that really make you feel good. But to give you a rule, to give you a fear, is not helpful. And there's not a rule that fits all disc herniations, like the first 15 degrees is dangerous.
Right.
There's no evidence for that. So we really have to just be careful, right?
Yes.
In yoga, I think, and again, I practice yoga. I'm not a yoga instructor. I often struggle with sort of the ideal posture in yoga. And I wonder if that's where a lot of people get into trouble, because it's that sort of end posture that is seen as the ideal sort of accomplishment. I look like the pose is supposed to look, right?
Right.
And 100% of the benefit of yoga is received by going towards a posture and nudging the edge of discomfort in that posture for that person in that day at that moment, right? And so sometimes you'll see yoga instructors give patients see, I'm a clinician, you can hear that, give participants a little nudge. Can I give you a bit of overpressure? Can I get you to looking like that posture a little bit more? And I think that's one of the worst things that we can do, because again, cueing them, can you drop that hip? Can you do this? Like giving them a different way into the posture to see what that feels like, but honoring kind of what their body is experiencing, what their brain is experiencing in that moment, going to pain, but not through pain.
Right.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's key. Really key. And also, we make up a lot of rules in movement with yoga as well. We're like, don't put your foot on your knee. Like we've talked about this on the podcast before, where we make up movement rules as well as yoga teachers.
Yeah.
There's something else that's really been coming up this week for me is people have been talking about the pelvis. Often I get tagged in those pelvic girdle pain posts on social media, and always I see the word like stability. Well, you need to build stability. And I think, no, your pelvis is stable. It's very stable and strong.
Right. Oh, that's so great. So again, we create fear through language, and that we need to drop that language completely in regards to pelvic girdle pain. In fact, if you want to dig a bit more into it, look at Peter O'Sullivan's work, who has been a researcher over the last probably decade or 15 years, really looking at low back pain and pelvic girdle pain, and kind of the approach that we use as clinicians for those problems. And he really, through his research, has debunked this concept that we are unstable. Right. And there's many others. So Darren Beals has done a lot of work in this area. There's a number of clinicians. And even the stories we tell alongside that, like relaxin, the hormone relaxin story that I've given many times to my clients. I no longer. But, we used to say that, and many clinicians still say that, well, when you produce more relaxin in your first and third trimester, you're more likely to have ligamentous sort of issues in pregnancy, and your pelvic girdle is becoming unstable.
Right.
There is no evidence now. We have good recent research from Paulson's group, and I think it was 2016, that showed us that actually relaxin hormonal changes are not connected with pelvic girdle pain in any way. In fact, what is more highly connected with pelvic girdle pain is trouble with gonadal hormones. So estrogen and testosterone and progesterone prior to pregnancy. So having period problems and dysmenorrhea, endometriosis, those sorts of things prior to pregnancy will predict who will have pelvic girdle pain in pregnancy.
Oh, that's fascinating. I did not know that. That is really cool. I don't know if you have any links, but we'll make sure to share them in the show notes if we have those.
Yeah, certainly
Is
can.
is there anything else that you ever wish, like I know that you're highlighting how helpful yoga is, so it's great for our yoga teachers to know that someone coming in could be really benefiting, someone dealing with persistent pain. Maybe they're not even talking about it. It could be really beneficial, the breath and the movement. Is there anything else that you think, oh, if yoga teachers knew this about the biopsychosocial framework or about pain, it would really make a big difference?
Okay. I would say the biggest message from instructors to their participants needs to be honor your body today in where it's at, knowing that every day is a different day. And that when you're practicing yoga, there is no ideal posture. It doesn't have to look like something. It really just has to be a reflection of where you are at today to move your body in this particular way. And if your feet need to be a little further apart, then let them be a little bit further apart. If one foot needs to be staggered in front of the other to make that more comfortable for you, that's fantastic. Is it better that they do a forward fold, for example, with a staggered foot and bent knees and feel more comfortable going to the edge of their pain versus, with their knees straighter and their feet together, or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish in a particular pose? So just giving participants more flexibility in how they participate in their yoga practice. Always using, so I'm going to borrow the phrase from Mike Stewart, who's a physiotherapist in the UK, always using this concept of going to their pain, not through their pain.
Right.
If they don't touch it, they're probably not doing anything. But if they're going through it, then their brain is starting to scream, you're going too far. This is not where I'm at today.
Right.
And maybe yesterday in yoga class that was okay, but my body's different today than it was yesterday. And maybe it's just because I had a really stressful experience this morning and everything's more sensitized and my nervous system is firing much quicker than it was yesterday because of that sensitization. And so I'm not going as far.
Yeah. Oh, that's really great to meet people where they're at and to really encourage them not to be pushing. Because we used to have that old saying, I feel like our yoga teachers are very good with that now. Not that like no pain, no gain, that just where that's out the window.
Yeah.
What about for the people who are those, like I call them as a yoga teacher, I call them the sensation junkies, like the people who are just pushing it right to the edge. Like, how am I supposed to know? Sometimes I look over and they're just like, they're going for like the biggest, it looks like they're doing the yoga Olympics over in the corner.
Yes. So, maybe as you're cueing through that, the first thing always, if you see someone really doing the yoga Olympics, can you check in with your breath? Are you holding your breath? Can you breathe in a relaxed way when you're that deep into the posture? Or give them permission to come out of the posture a little bit to get their breath calm and relaxed. So can they keep their breath calm? And if they really look like they're striving, can you keep your body calm? So can you hold that posture and relax your muscles in that? So again, using the muscles that you need to stay in the posture, but not sort of over recruiting everything to get into that posture and stay into that posture. So again, I'm going to borrow these from Neil Pearson, right? Is your breath calm? Is your body calm? What's going on in your head right now? Are you striving to perfect that posture? Or are you honoring kind of where you're at right at this moment, knowing that there's never, because is there ever really an end point to yoga? You can probably always challenge that posture further, right? Yeah. And so because there's no end point, it really is the journey, not the destination, right? And I think so many people participate in yoga thinking, I've got to look like that posture. I've got to be that, and then I've had a successful practice, right?
Right. Yeah. And in the West, we've really focused on the poses where it was like kind of do this movement or this breath until you can sit in meditation. That was the goal of it. It was really way more about doing so much more with the mind. But of course, we like to change things like that in the West.
We do. Yeah.
We like to make it more competitive. And
yeah. Yeah. And you know what? There's always in a yoga class, like there's always one person who's got the best posture and everyone's striving to be that, can I go a little bit further? I mean, I don't participate in classes anymore. I do it at home. But I can remember in classes thinking, she looks good,
Yeah.
Can I look like that? Right. And so it is the competitive nature and that can get us into some trouble with yoga sometimes, right?
It can. What about those that might be listening who have been dealing with persistent pain themselves? Do you have anything to share with them?
So first of all, understand that persistent pain, number one, your pain is real. If anyone has ever told you, listen, I can't find anything to explain your pain, I don't understand it, you'll just have to live with it, or your pain is not real, there's nothing going on here, please hear, first of all, that your pain is real. Okay. And the International Association for the Study of Pain, the definition that I gave you at the beginning, has actually in 2020, for the first time in 41 years, kind of sort of tweaked that definition. And so the basic definition is the same, but then they have 6 caveats that kind of explain that pain is personal. Pain is always real. Always real. Okay. Pain should never be challenged from that perspective. So first of all, understand that yes, you have a problem, but you may have a problem with your pain system more than your tissues. And especially if you're practicing yoga and you've got good flexibility and strength, then it's more likely a pain system issue that you're having. Also know that those changes within the pain system, within the central nervous system, the spinal cord and the brain, are what we call neuroplastic. And that just means that they can change. They change to adapt, to protect you a little bit quicker and sooner. For some reason, your brain decided you needed more protection. Okay. Your brain can also unlearn that protection. So you can change your pain system. Recognizing that you have a pain system problem then means you have to dig a bit deeper, hopefully with a clinician that has some good experience and skills in a biopsychosocial framework, right? That starts to look at why is the pain system more sensitive? So maybe it's that smudging issue that we talked about. Well, there's a way of measuring that. We can use a questionnaire to actually objectively measure whether you have smudging going on. It's called the Fremantle questionnaire. Maybe it's depression. We know in musculoskeletal pain that 25 to 50% of people with chronic, persistent musculoskeletal pain have comorbid depression at the same time. And if you help the pain, you help the depression. If you help the depression, you help the pain. They feed into each other. What is one of the best things you can do for depression? Yoga. Right. Cardiovascular exercise, resistance training. They all have equal levels of evidence that activating your body and getting moving is really helpful for depression and for pain. But that might look different than someone who is really catastrophizing. Catastrophizing means you're freaking out a little bit. That's normal. You got kind of stuck in that mode. But people who are catastrophizing often don't understand the pain system. So there's some good research that really learning about pain and how pain is being produced helps decrease the catastrophization. So again, targeting how you desensitize the nervous system is going to be really individualized, right? I treat no 2 patients the same. There's no protocol here. But it's going to take a bit of skill with alongside working with someone who has some training in treating pain from a whole person perspective.
That's amazing. I love how you say there's no protocol. It's not like, okay, we'll do this because this worked for, 25% of other people. That is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can our yoga teachers who are interested in learning more, how can they study with you?
So Reframe Rehab is a brand new 2020 Start of COVID teaching company. One of our mandates was to do live online international courses, and guess what? Everyone else went live online at exactly the same time. So it's been an interesting world for sure. But our mandate or our goal, our mission really at Reframe Rehab is to break down the silos between musculoskeletal pain and pain science and pelvic health. And our courses are open to anybody who works with people with pain. So kinesiologists, yoga therapists, yoga instructors, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, psychologists. So we're really trying to break down some of the silos within which we practice, because if we practice with the physical body, as you do in yoga, then also starting to understand the psychosocial components is also really important. And for our mental health colleagues who practice more in the psychosocial framework, understanding the body is really important. So probably the course that you took with me, Shannon, the Biopsychosocial Framework course, is a great place to start. But there are many different courses that will be taught on yoga principles and persistent pain. Neil Pearson will be teaching a couple of courses for us. Shelley will be teaching a course for us. So we really are looking to integrate pain from a whole person perspective and make pain care very accessible to anybody who talks to people about pain.
Right. You also have a great book. A yoga teacher was like, you need to read this book about pain. And she brought it over. I was like, this is Carolyn's book.
There you go. So if you go onto our website and you sign up for the website, you can download a free PDF book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Pain. And it's a self-help book. Thank you for saying that. I'd forgotten actually it was there. So you can, it's sort of a self-help book taking you through all the different components of desensitizing your nervous system. And so, not everyone will have the opportunity to work alongside someone who's going to coach them through that process. But remember that your brain prioritizes survival. So first and foremost, if it feels threatened, it's going to protect you in some way, right?
Yes.
And so learning more about pain, learning more about your pain system, understanding that you really are not fragile. Going back to that pelvic girdle pain issue and stability, that language, the biggest problem with that language is we create fragility in our patients.
Yes.
How in the world is the pelvis not supposed to be able to stabilize you when you jump up and down and stand on one feet? Your ligaments are so dense that hold those pelvic bones together that if you're in a car accident and you have a significant head-on collision, your bones will fracture in your pelvis before those ligaments tear. That's how strong they are. They cannot become unstable. In pelvic girdle pain, and Peter O'Sullivan's work has actually shown that tension, guarding, fear actually causes more sensitivity and problems with pelvic girdle pain than biomechanical instability. So we have to go back to your body has healed itself, has whatever injury you had, your body will heal itself, Shannon, right? Yes. And then we need to desensitize it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's the desensitization process that we need to get better at.
That's so good. And this is where yoga can really help our people who are dealing with that. Thank you so much. I feel like there's so much information here that we could dive into. I definitely recommend your course on the biopsychosocial model of care. Also, Dr. Sinead Dufour I saw was doing one on pelvic girdle pain. So that was another one. I was like, I just want to take them all. I would say start with one. Don't sign up for all of them.
Right.
Yeah. But thank you so much for the work that you do and for taking the time to share this with us today.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me. And keep doing the great work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Well, connected yoga teachers, I would love to hear what your questions and thoughts are now after listening to this episode with Carolyn. Again, thank you so much, Carolyn, for your time and all of the work that you have done around the world in terms of pelvic health and pain. I really think that you have a beautiful way of teaching big concepts, and I appreciate so much that you speak to the yoga teachers as well as the PTs and the doctors, that you're looking at all of the different people who serve individuals in their health journey. Like I said at the beginning of today's episode, Connected Yoga Teachers, if you feel like you want to dive into this further, ask Carolyn some more questions. She's coming on as a guest inside of Pelvic Health Professionals this month. And there's also a whole hour-long talk that we did with Carolyn, even more in depth in this. For example, Carolyn shared her 14-page intake form and went through really how that intake process with someone is very different when we look at the biopsychosocial model and persistent pain. Also in there, Carolyn talked about how tissues can be three things: tight, weak, or sensitive. And Carolyn also talked about different people who have driven PTs, our physiotherapists and physical therapists, to adopt this broader approach of care. Another fascinating thing from that, and I'm excited if you go over and have a listen to the full talk that we did with Carolyn, was this real connection between low back pain and the pelvic floor. So often, I think like every single human walking the planet needs to know more about their pelvic floor and how it relates to the entire body. I mean, this is really in my view, and it might be a biased view because I've done so much study into pelvic health, but every time I learn something new, I'm just like, this needs to be taught to us when we're in elementary school. Like, this needs to be part of the health conversation. Who ever thought, oh, if I'm having low back pain, then I need to consider how my pelvic floor is doing. So like I said, if you want to join in more of the conversation, come on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com and you can listen to the talk that we did with Carolyn, as well as join our live Q&A that's happening on February the 22nd. And then in March, you'll also see that we have a training on pelvic girdle pain and what we as yoga teachers can do to help those students who are dealing with that hip pain or pelvic pain that they're experiencing. If you have any questions at all, you can email us. info@pelvichealthprofessionals.com is the email for that. I also want to give a shout out of thank you to our team, Suzanne, Crunch, Nick, and Sinead, for making so much possible behind the scenes. Everything from the Facebook group to articles that are going out to how this audio sounds to just scheduling our podcast guests. They're all doing amazing work behind the scenes. And as we get ready to celebrate our 4-year podcast anniversary together, just a lot of love to them for doing the work that they do. And to you, dear Connected Yoga Teacher, this podcast exists because you listen to it. That is, at the end of the day, what is really important. We want to hear from you. If you have questions about anything, we are up for answering those questions. There's a really fun voicemail button on our homepage at theconnectedyogateacher.com. Also, if you want to ask over 10,000 yoga teachers a question, we have an amazing and supportive Facebook group. If you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, you can see the join button right from our homepage. In there, I am just over and over again excited about the questions that come in, the conversations that are happening, and the support in there. Alrighty, it is time for me to sign off. I want to tell you, out my window, the snow is falling so lightly and there is so much snow everywhere. It is definitely a winter wonderland. I am going to get out and have a walk outside. I want to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.